Hi, I'm Ted London, Senior Research Fellow at the William Davidson Institute. And I'm here today with Chris Jochnick, Director of Oxfam America's Private Sector Department. Chris, thanks for being here.
Yeah, thank you.
Chris, I know Oxfam has now run a program in Ethiopia for the past 4 years to provide microinsurance to local farmers. Can you talk a little bit about the history of that project?
Sure. Well, we have had operations in Ethiopia since into the 1960s going forward, and we've been working with some particular communities in the northern part of Ethiopia that are particularly prone to drought and are going to be affected by climate change and are quite vulnerable farming communities. And about 5 years ago, we started talking with Swiss Re, one of the world's largest reinsurers, about piloting a microinsurance product with these communities. And in 2007, we started negotiating a partnership with Swiss Re. And then we did some studies about those communities, the demand, the interest in microinsurance. Started working with Columbia University to design a product. And then we finally piloted the first product in 2009 with 200 farmers. And then subsequently we launched another wave of, or we went out and did another set of, we worked again in 2010 with a much bigger group. Then we hit 1,300 farmers. And this past season, we reached almost 13,000 farmers. So we've gradually been expanding the work, and it's important to know that it's embedded within a broader set of interventions having to do with risk reduction. That's the sort of traditional work we've done with those communities, which means things like capturing rainwater, more effective use of fertilizers, and planting different types of seeds and trees to mitigate some of the risks that they're already facing. And then we have the microinsurance to transfer those risks that they can't mitigate. And then by virtue of having microinsurance, these community or these farmers are able to take some additional risks and they can get credit. And finally, we're hoping to add an element of savings alongside the insurance. So it's quite a holistic program.
With regard to the microinsurance aspect, can you talk a little bit more about how that works? How are the farmers protected?
Well, it's different than the sort of insurance that people in the U.S. might be familiar with, health insurance or life insurance, in the sense that this is an index product, which means that to reduce the overhead and the administrative costs, it's not based on a particular farmer's crop loss. It's based on a proxy for that, which in this case would be rainfall. So the farmer will buy the product, buy the insurance, and it's quite cheap. And then if the rains don't come to a certain level, he will receive an automatic payout, whether or not he's actually lost or lost some crops in the process. And one of the innovations with this product to ensure that there was sufficient interest and demand and that it really suited the farmers was that we worked quite closely with the farmers and with their cooperatives to make sure that the design of the product really fit their needs. And what they really wanted was a product that would reduce risks against events that happen more or less every 4 to 7 years. So there's quite a frequent payout, but it's not an enormous payout when those events happen.
So Oxfam is a nonprofit organization involved in development for many, many years in many countries. Why this project? Why are you doing this with Swiss Re, with some other partners?
Well, that's a good question. We have done some work in microfinance in the past, but really this is part of a much broader effort within Oxfam America and the broader Oxfam family to work with the private sector to address some of these large, difficult development challenges. And Oxfam traditionally has viewed the private sector quite warily. And we've often been on the outside pushing back on what we would consider abusive corporate behavior. But we also recognize that we're never really going to get to the large poverty reduction types of processes at scale if we don't work with the private sector as well. And so this sort of fits into that collaboration side where we think there's a good opportunity to work with private sector actors or with industries. We have in the past and in this project found ways to work with companies in a way that's pro-poor, which is of interest to us, but is also commercially sustainable or eventually commercially sustainable for the companies.
Can you talk a little bit about how you're actually able to work successfully with the private sector? What have you learned in conducting these kind of partnerships?
Yeah, well, one of the tricks for Oxfam, of course, is the question of trust and culture. Trust because many inside Oxfam are quite, as I said, quite wary of the private sector, and many in the private sector can be wary of Oxfam because of our history of being sort of aggressive advocates on certain issues. And so on that trust issue, we have to convince companies that we are, in whatever mode we're in, we go about our work very responsibly. We can be trusted with sensitive information. We're competent in what we do. There's a series of markers that we have to meet, I think, to build that kind of trust. And by the same virtue, the company, we need to trust that the company is really bought in, that from their CEO down, that this really fits within their overall way of doing business, whatever the project is, that they're in it for the long term, and those sorts of issues. So the trust issues are quite important. And then the culture, the development community is not full of MBAs or people that have a long history working in the private sector. And many inside the private sector really don't understand a lot of the development issues that we deal with day to day. So there's different ways of talking about things. There's different ways of understanding. The expectations can be quite different. So culturally also, it takes some time to come to a real understanding. With Swiss Re, I think there's been a level of sophistication on their side that has made it easier in terms of the development issues and the development challenges. And on the Oxfam side, Swiss Re, because of their history on climate change, where they've been really quite a constructive advocate, and the fact that there haven't been so many, let's say, high-profile problematic issues with Swiss Re or the insurance industry, it's been a little easier to overcome both the trust and the cultural issues for us.
So as you begin to move forward, you build some trust, you address some of the cultural differences. What comes next in really developing a meaningful cross-sector partnership?
Well, I think coming to terms on what the project will look like, the scale of it, how it will be funded, the different roles, really just hammering out the details about who's responsible for what, and making sure that the two sides have clear expectations, and that, again, there's buy-in from the very top. So we want our CEOs to meet with each other and get to know each other. We want our senior management to get to know each other. And then we will create a series of goals, objectives, and responsibilities. In this case, Swiss Re was more than just a financer of this project. They also were involved in helping us design the product, in thinking strategically about how to address certain issues. And so we had a set of expectations from both sides, and then we came to an agreement. And then once we had our agreement with Swiss Re, we went out and together built agreements with other partners. And in this case, or maybe as many as 12 or 13 different partners came together, with Oxfam serving as something of a quarterback or catalyst for and convener of all these different partners. And so with each one, we had to make sure that Swiss Re, Oxfam, and the growing list of partners were comfortable working with one another and got to know each other, and that there were very clear and transparent protocols and understandings.
So, the project, the microinsurance project, has gone from 200 to 1,200 to about 12,000. And now it's sort of evolved from a project called Harita to something called R4, where it's a more holistic approach to risk. It's also a vision there for scale. How do you think the cross-sector partnership, the relationship, needs to evolve as you go to scale? Or what are some of the challenges you might envision going from some escalating pilots to really going to scale, where you're thinking about going much deeper into Ethiopia and beyond?
Yeah, well, in this case, scale will bring a number of new challenges. But just getting to this point has also required us to meet some of those challenges. So we've laid a certain platform, I would say, that will allow us to get there, and I'll explain that. One of the big innovations of this project has been meeting the question of demand. That's to say that many of these microinsurance pilots in the past have been technically sound, but they didn't have the farmers, or they couldn't get buy-in. And we really started from the farmer side and tried to address their needs first, and then dealt with the technical side. And one of the big innovations was working with the government and their food safety programs to allow people to work not only for cash, but in this case, work for their insurance premium. So that ability for people to, instead of pay with cash for the insurance, but instead to work some amount of days, has allowed us to scale up significantly. That has meant that a lot of farmers were able to purchase or willing to purchase product that wouldn't have been otherwise. And that there is an existing infrastructure to work with these food safety nets, or cash for work safety nets, across Ethiopia and across a number of countries. And the second layer of that is that we have recently signed on a large partnership with the World Food Program, which is the largest safety net food provider in the world. And so with that, through that partnership with the World Food Program, we now have the ability to go to a number of new villages in Ethiopia, but also go outside of Ethiopia and try to scale up. So we've put in place, I think, some of the demand side that we need. But the question that you raise about challenges that we'll face are just maybe emerging in the sense that bringing in the World Food Program and creating this larger scale has already ramped up the need for more financing. It's brought in new players. The USAID has offered to fund some of the new scaling, which means that we now have new actors. And that raises, of course, a lot of issues in terms of how the collaboration works, who runs it, who's responsible for it, how it's branded. And then the issue of, on the commercial side, Swiss Re really has been, I would say, supporting this more as a philanthropic or experimental piloting of a product. It hasn't really reached anywhere near what might be considered commercial scale for Swiss Re. But if it does, and we hope it will, that may bring in new players also, and it may bring in new actors inside Swiss Re. They will be facing new risks potentially. Oxfam will also be facing some new risks. We can sort of manage the risks at a level of 12,000. It'll be quite different if we get up into the millions in terms of our exposure. So there's just a number of issues that will be created by scale. Finally, the big challenge, though, here is that this is a lot of the demand side, as I was explaining, is driven by what could be considered a subsidy, in the sense that somebody has to pay for that work that the farmers do in order to purchase their premium. And there's also Oxfam support and the support of others. So as we scale up, there's a need for additional financial support, and that's still philanthropic or donor support. That's not commercial. And so that is facing us right in the, squarely. How do we bring in more resources for this as we try to scale up?
As you think about your experience, and you've worked with Swiss Re as well as other private sector partners, and these partnerships have evolved over time. And they've gone from smaller to bigger. Now you're thinking, even bigger scale. What sort of lessons have you learned that you might share with others that are sort of maybe in the early stages of a cross-sector partnership that they hope to scale? What would you say, what should you pay attention to as you think about scale?
Well, okay, as I think about scale, but also just thinking about these kinds of projects in general, it goes back to your first question about why Oxfam is involved in microinsurance. And I think to a casual observer, it's sort of a strange place for Oxfam America to be. We don't have a history in microinsurance. There are many other institutions that do have histories with insurance. We don't even really have a deep history on the financial services side. But I think what Oxfam did bring to this equation may provide some useful insights for these kinds of collaborations in general. We had the benefit of relationships with lots of different actors in the North and in the South, and we had the trust and the of those different actors and the ability to work very well with different actors. And I think that's one of the big challenges in any kind of multi-stakeholder effort, is building that kind of trust and those kinds of relationships across North-South and across commercial and nonprofit. And it really takes a certain type of organization and certain types of people, frankly, having the right people that can overcome political small p type of issues or cultural sensitivities. That's really vital. And this project has run into many different difficult and unexpected challenges, not of a technical sort or of an economic, but really just relationships issues, sensitivities. And so one of the big insights is how important that is, that side of it, and how do you develop the sort of talent or the capacities to address those kinds of issues, I think is really easily overlooked in these kinds of collaborations. And again, it's a stressful business. It's politically fraught, and so being very deliberate about thinking through those kinds of issues up front is important. Certainly that as one insight among others.
Chris, you mentioned there are other insights. Are there any others that you'd like to mention?
Yes, okay. I think that another easily overlooked issue, at least coming out of the development community, probably less overlooked on the business side, is the importance of project management. This project, because of all the different players and the many different technical challenges, has really required enormous and effective project management. And things have to be delivered on a timeline because of the planting seasons. People have to be educated during a certain period, and trust has to be built over a certain period, and different players have to come in at different stages. And so managing that kind of multi-faceted, multi-actor project, I think, is also a critical skill that is not often, as far as I've been around the development side for maybe 20 years, it's not a skill that is really cultivated deliberately in many different organizations. And I think we were fortunate to have good project managers, not only in Oxfam, but in other actors that were working on this, bringing it forward.
Any further insights on running successful partnerships, cross-sector partnerships?
Well, I guess another insight would be, as I said, there are many challenges that will emerge in an unanticipated fashion, and any kind of innovation that requires a certain amount of risk-taking like this will require a comfort level with innovating on the fly or being a little nimble or going off plan if necessary. And there, again, have been a few moments where had Oxfam or some of our partners been a little too rigid in the way that they wanted this project to go forward, I think we could have failed. We could have missed a season, or we could have gone down a track that wasn't right. Maybe we wouldn't have built the kind of trust we needed in a community. And so having that sort of nimbleness, you want to be a good project manager and have deliberate planning, but you also have to be comfortable with a certain amount of innovation and nimbleness in the process. I'll give you one more insight. I think what really made this project work in a way that other pilots have not failed is the fact that Oxfam brought, and I talk from Oxfam's perspective, but I don't mean to exclude the other actors because each has been critical to this collaboration, but I'll speak for Oxfam. We brought a certain mindset about development that happens, I think, to be the right mindset, but also worked really well in this project. And that mindset is that long-term development really requires the buy-in of the affected people. And those affected people have to be the protagonists in their own development. And in this case, this wouldn't have worked had we not already had many years of relationships with these farmers and with the support organizations in Ethiopia, and if we hadn't brought them in at the front end and at the beginning of the design period and really made sure that they were part of it, real partners with Swiss Re and with the local insurers in designing the product, and that they really bought into it and understood it. And that's so vital in something like insurance, because you're really asking people to take a risk on a completely unknown product and hope that if disaster strikes in 3 years, they'll get some kind of payout. And in this case, we were able to do that because we spent a lot of that time. We're used to spending that kind of time and investing in that kind of effort. And I think that mindset may be difficult for people coming out of the business community or elsewhere, appreciating the amount of investment that you have to make in those kinds of relationships to build people up and build up their trust, their capacity, their buy-in, in order for something like this to work.
Chris, thank you so much. I appreciate the time.
Yeah, thank you.